Today's guest speaker in our first Make America Think Again lecture series is what we call this. We have Miriam Agoof on the right of me, okay? She and I actually work together for the Dallas Housing Authority. She works for the Dallas Housing Authority as a Vice President of Policy Development and Research, and I sit on the board of that organization. Okay? That's how we met, that's how we got acquainted. So just to give you some background information about her, Miriam was born and raised in France, Tours, France to be exact, and she, after attending Sorbonne Law School in Paris, she received her bachelor's degree in political science, government and international law, as well as a master's degree in public administration from Lamar University. Okay. Recently, she's a graduate of urban planning and public policy from UTA, so right down the street here. Okay. In addition to her credentials, let's talk about a little bit of what she does, okay? So she's responsible for performing research on trends, conditions related to people in poverty and impacts of segregation, shortage of affordable housing, limited access to gainful employment, healthcare, transportation, and disinvestment in surrounding community, as well as development of strategic evidence based on policy to address these matters. That's a lot of words.
I did not write it, I promise.
But what we're going to do is we're going to get into some of those, and then we're going to get a little personal, but also professional, and also how does the things that the Dallas Housing Authority, the housing of urban development and planning, how does that affect you on the micro level, and how does that work on the macro level? So we're going to talk about both of those things. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Miriam Agoof.
Thank you, Commissioner Major.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to sit right here, and we're going to ask a few questions. And then from these questions, just do your best to answer them as well as possible. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to give the floor to Miriam, and she has a PowerPoint presentation where she's going to talk about some statistics and some of the research that she actually does in her line of work. Okay? All right. So, first question. Our theme for this lecture series is called, for this semester, is Make America Think Again. In your own words, what does that mean to you?
All right, so that's a loaded question. And first of all, good morning, everyone. It's a huge class. I haven't seen a class this big before, so hopefully I'm going to make sense to you all. The accent comes, and there is no subtitle, so please just get used to it. So it's a loaded question. I would say that it's about thinking critically, right? And making sure that you are your own agent of your decision and that you're not taking for granted whatever is being thrown at you. I think it is very important, in this world of constant information and misinformation, that you are the one at the forefront of collecting data or just collecting information. It doesn't have to be, purely sophisticated, but you can just go on your own, make some research, think critically about what's being said and whether it's true or not. Very importantly, especially in the field of policy that is very embedded with values, what is right, what is wrong. We've been doing this for a long time, so we should continue doing it for a long time. Sometimes you have to really question some of the underlying issues or assumptions behind why we do the things we do. Right, so think again is thinking critically, but also being your own agent of information.
Okay, thank you. Okay, describe your job title, and the work that you contribute to with the Dallas Housing Authority, and what past experiences have led you up to this point.
Sure. So anybody familiar with the Dallas Housing Authority? Raise your hand. No, any housing authority, you don't know what we do, right? There is one? All right, you get an A for the class. We agree on that. So I'm going to make everything very simple, right? Because it's kind of cumbersome and it kind of sucks too, so let's make it simple. you have the federal government, right? And then you have like different boxes where you have the US Department of Transportation, Education, Housing, Commerce, right? You have like those big entities. And then those folks, they send money down to local entities, right? So they would send money down to like planning organization, housing authority, cities, so those entities can actually function using federal dollars. So far, you're following me kind of? Where the US Department of Housing and Urban Development have local branches, quote unquote, and the Dallas Housing Authority is one of them. But you also have a lot of housing authorities across the country, and the mission of those housing authorities is to provide affordable housing. Right, so each housing authority has a mission to operate federal housing programs, and they all differ in what programs they operate and how many families they can service. So the Dallas Housing Authority operates two big programs, public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher Program known as Section 8, formerly known as Section 8. Right, so what we do as a housing authority is to administer this program. There's a lot of paperwork, give me your birth certificates, how much you're making, making sure that the landlord is giving you a unit that is good, all right? So that's what the housing authority does. Now the Dallas Housing Authority covers 7 counties, which is a very big jurisdiction, meaning that we have authority to house people in the 7 counties. So because we have such a big program, we have to be very intentional and strategic in providing housing opportunities to our families. And so what my department does is to actually develop intel or data that will tell us how to best perform our mission. Because sometimes you have like a lot of things to think about and your brain cannot do it just looking at data. So you have to do some research, use your computers, use a couple software, to see what are some of the best locations to recommend for certain families or some gaps that may be geographical that we can tackle. So again, my mission is to develop policies and programs, meaning I'm developing the rules of how things are done, hoping that we will reach that outcome of providing a housing solution that makes sense for the families we service. So a lot of the work that we do involves data, which is inevitable nowadays. I hope that you guys like data, and if you don't, that's cool too. But when you deal with like very big issues or problems, you will have to utilize data to figure out what is the best thing to do. So we look at locational patterns of our families, whether they have access to quality education, transportation options, access to grocery store. And if we see any type of disparities or inequalities, then we have to, again, draft programs and policies to address those issues. So that's what my team does. So develop policies, programs, recommend them to the CEO, usually very supportive of what we do, and then we implement them on the ground.
In addition to that, Dallas Housing Authority is also working on a collaboration program coming up in the next year or so with DCCCD, including Mountain View College, to work for housing vouchers for students and also faculty members, okay? So it's gonna be something very big coming up in the future. Okay, move on to the next question. So would you consider analyzing data or information a strength and discuss how
it works?
Yeah.
Definitely. So I'm going to tell you like how the real world works when you sit at a table with your boss, some of the people that may disagree with you. It's not about who screams the loudest or who's the most outgoing person around the table. Is, are you able to make a compelling case to build consensus around you? Like, can you convince me that your option is better than mine, right? And so to do that, you have to have a defensible approach, right? Something that is objective, that is not just based on your feelings, what you see of what you've heard. And so data allows you to have this objective approach to what you're proposing. In other terms, if I say, hey, you know what, CEO, I think we should be doing A because I've crunched the data and this is what justify my recommendation. So that allows you multiple things. First, again, to get this objectivity aspect of doing business and to make sure that it's not something that is biased or based on my feelings. That may be well-intended, but also ill-intended. The other thing is to make sure that we maximize efficiency, right? So you can't just go in the dark and start spending public dollars, right? You have to make sure that the resources that you have, you're using them the right way, and data allows you to figure out how to best utilize your resources to achieve the outcome that you have laid up front. And when you think about, just housing policy or just like public policies in general, which affects you on your everyday life, you may not see it, but I'm sure we might talk about it. We are using public resources, and it's very important to make sure that we are responsive to the needs of the community. My mission is to meet whatever needs you guys have, and if I fail, then it's gonna be a problem. So again, data is extremely important to make sure that we use resources the right way, that we can defend our position, and that we can be actually accountable to the public. Someone can come to me tomorrow and say, hey, why did you do this? I can say, well, because I thought it was good. Like, no, not really. I have to show the report, the analysis that justify why we're going the route that we're going. And usually you don't have to start from scratch. There is already an existing body of research or data analysts that have done the work before you, so you can leverage some of those best practices in your field.
Can you share with us an experience when you've applied new technology or information in your job, and how did it help the organization?
Yeah.
Just give me an example.
Yeah, so funny enough, like government is so far behind from like our world. I'm not that much older than you guys. But something that was very interesting when I joined the Dallas Housing Authority is that technology or data was not really prevalent. There's someone who really wants to come to that class from the other door.
Say run, just run.
Okay, exit that way, guys. So when I joined the Dallas Housing Authority, it's government. So it's kind of old. They don't know about like digital transformation, super far behind. But luckily, when my CEO hired me, he knew that my strength was, data analysis, like just program design. And so he built this policy research and development entity. And with that, we acquired new software that allows us to like manipulate data. And example, I don't know if you guys know Redbird Mall. Kinda, yeah? So
he's coming here on the 5th, Peter Brodowski.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome speaker. Great guy. So long story short, big employer is coming to Redbird Mall, creating 500 jobs. Super cool, right? And what we want to do is to make sure that we actually provide those job opportunities to the families that we service through our housing vouchers in public housing. So what we've done is to do like a bunch of data analysis, which would consist on, right, like this is a map, right? My hand is a map today. So like you put the pin of like Redbird Mall, and then I draw a circle of like 5 miles, and I see who lives within the 5 miles, what's their wage, are they close to transit, do they have the credentials to apply for the job? So we did a lot of data analysis that is not done in our field. Usually, we go based on intuition, which is not the most efficient way to go. And in doing that, we've been able to actually recruit families that were well suited for the job and actually hired before the big hiring fair at Redbird Mall and got the job. And so that was one way for us to leverage data, to deal with big information, narrow it down to serve the families that we serve. So that was one way to bridge data analysis and the implementation of services in our agency, which is again, very, very new. I believe we are the only housing authorities with a policy and research development unit in the country. The federal government has one, but I don't know of any other housing authorities that has one. So pretty transformative to use data to build with. Yeah.
Do you want to go into the slide?
Sure, and maybe one thing that I want to say, because I'm talking about data, what do you think data is when I say data? Because it means nothing and everything, right? You're like, what do you mean data? Like numbers, where do you get them? That could be like a whole new presentation on where to get data and information. But primarily what we deal with it, the type of information that I deal with are twofold. The first one is the families that we service. So I know that Bob, John, Mary, whatever, all these folks, I know their age, their gender, how many families, their income, where they live, right? I have like a profile, kind of like your Facebook, but on Excel. I know everything about them. On the other side, I have geographical information, meaning like this map, I can build it, right? So if I put my finger anywhere on the map, I would know what is the poverty average in that area, right? What is the median income of that area? How close is the nearest grocery store, right? So you have like geographical information. So what you do then is that you plug those families based on where they are, boop, 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 on the map, and you're able to see what type of neighborhood are they living in it, right? And sometimes, and I'm sure I'll get into it in the slide, you will see that certain folks of certain groups, sometimes it's racial or income-wise, tend to live in neighborhoods that don't offer the same quality of life And this is where our job comes into play and say like, not right, we're using public dollars, we can't discriminate, we have to make sure that we give a fair shot to everybody. So that's the type of data that we're looking at. So data about people, data about places, like what is the housing stock like, transportation, and then we combine the two and see what type of disparities or what type of trends we observe. And often we do that across time so we can see evolution, and sometimes we just take picture, like as of today, this is what it looks like. So this is data in a big way, what I'm talking about.
In our current chapter, we're talking about discussing the economic principles of demand and supply. And so some of the topics that you're going to go through in the slide she's going to talk about some of the things like the shortages or segregation or some of these topics that can show you how we apply these principles in urban development planning, to see how it applies and it works for not just Dallas-Fort Worth, but you and your actual community. Because some of these, you'll see some of these cases affect you in your own community as well in the South Dallas area. Okay.
Yeah. And I want to do a quick statement because it's kind of important. So you're probably wondering, like, how is this affecting me? So there is a lot of research that has been done, across the country and internationally. And there is one big research that has been done by Dr. Chetty, which is like in Stanford, Harvard, amazing schools. But long story short, the neighborhood within which you grow up has a lot to do with your outcome in life as an adult, right? So of course you have people who are going to break the odds, but most of the time if you don't grow up in a quality neighborhood, it's going to be more difficult for you to break the cycle of poverty, right? And I think that as a society, we've made a commitment to make sure that everybody thrives, right? I'm sure you can have people making more than others, but you don't want the gap to be too big. That becomes very unacceptable. And so one way for us to make sure that you have a fair chance at life, because we're using public dollars, so we can't make it harder for you and easier for her, right? So we pay very close attention to what neighborhoods look like in terms of amenity, like income, grocery store, employment opportunities, and so forth. So this is how it affects you. It affects how many businesses comes in your neighborhood, it affects your property taxes, it affects your parents' commute time. I mean, there is a lot of repercussion with your everyday life on your neighborhood. Cool stuff.
Randy, is it okay if I dim light just a little bit?
I'm gonna sip on my coffee. You guys can hear me okay? Is the accent bearable? Yes. I bet. All right. So on the agenda today, I'm going to talk about two things. The first thing is the assessment of fair housing. And the second one is a transportation research that I have conducted myself. So what is the assessment of fair housing? By the way, this is, nope, not working now. This is the US Department of Housing and Urban Development. Again, put simply, remember I told you there's the federal government and then you have like local entities that receive federal dollars. If I give you money, it comes with strings attached. Yeah, I'm gonna give you $100, but I want you to make sure that you do this. That's how it works. So the federal government gives dollars to the City of Dallas, City of Mesquite, City of Fort Worth, and housing authorities. And by receiving federal dollars, they have to make sure that they are in compliance with what the federal government wants, right? In 2015, under the previous administration, before the Make America Great Again was a thing, we had a new requirement for those receiving federal dollars. And that requirement is to do a big assessment of fair housing. And the intent is for recipients of federal dollars. So let's pretend I'm the City of Dallas, all right? I'm the City of Dallas, or the Dallas Housing Authority. I get federal dollars. In 2015, the federal government comes to me and say, hey, you get federal dollars from us. Now we want you to do a big assessment of fair housing. And this assessment is a data-driven exercise. So it's like crunching a lot of data and looking at what are the fair housing issues in your communities that you have to tackle. And the intent is just not to make it cumbersome for them. It's really for them to then be able to say, we're doing this because we have found this, instead of just like going in the dark, not really knowing why we're spending the money that we're spending and where and for whom and so forth. And this requirement to do this like big, it's like a big homework, like literally it's like a bunch of data. I'm gonna go through it. It's crazy, but it's good. And it's under the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. So it's Let's not get too regulatory, but that's the rule. And the purpose of all of this, again, is to take meaningful actions to combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive and integrated communities, right? What is this? It's a map. What? They're like a bunch of different shapes, and all the shapes are the jurisdictions of the entity. I should have said that before. Before joining the Dallas Housing Authority, I was a researcher at UTA, and I was contracted to do this assessment for 21 entities. And that is the largest group in the country, guys. Yeah, we get the trophy in DFW. Again, that was a mandate, so everyone had to do that. So we did this assessment for 21 entities, and you can see that all the shapes are overlapping, which really talks about regional collaboration to do the assessment. I'm gonna go super fast. How does it work? So like the federal government send everybody a questionnaire. Bunch of questions, answer the questions. I'm gonna give you data. So boop. HUD is the US Department of Housing and Urban Development. So the government gave the city of Dallas data and say, use that data and answer those questions. But the city of Dallas also had to come up with new data, like supplemental data, and talk to people, right? Because sometimes data doesn't tell you everything. So you have to contextualize some of the things that you may find through your data analysis by talking to the communities. And the fair housing issues that were in the questionnaire were related to segregation, racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, housing need, access to opportunities, and so forth. So literally had a questionnaire. It says, question 1A, describe patterns of segregation in your jurisdiction and the region. With the map, you answer the question. Question B, describe, I don't know what I said first, so I'm gonna say something different, hopefully second. Describe transportation options for African Americans, right? So a bunch of questions that have to be answered based on the data provided by the federal government and also other data that you are able to collect yourself. We do all this whole data exercise, and then at the end, it's just not to say, oh, look, we have lots of issues. All right, let's go home. No, you have to actually then go back, formulate fair housing goals as of how do you plan on addressing those issues that you see in your jurisdiction. So far, so good? Yeah, awesome. All right, so we're gonna talk about a few topics: segregation, poverty, source of income discrimination, affordability, and transportation. And I'm gonna try to be as quick as possible. All right, so you think I was gonna talk the whole time? That's a lie. Question 1. It's gonna be on your quiz. No, it's not gonna be, I don't know, maybe. So, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, 50 years later. What do you think? Is racial segregation in Dallas declining, stagnating, deepening, or it's fake news? Declining. All right, let's do declining, raise your hand. You're not gonna lose points. Declining, we're doing better on racial? Okay, couple hands. Stagnating, like the same, is the same as before, as of 50 years? No? It's worse than before? There's a lot of people not voting. You gotta vote, guys. All right, it's fake news. Fake news? No? All right, well, let's talk about this. What is this? It's an index. Long story short, I'm gonna give you my back for a second. You see you have like different temperature stuff. I don't know the English for it, but like, you have 1990, 2000, 2010, 2013, and this gives you like, it gauges how high or how low it is. The blue arrow is the level of black, non-white white segregation. Segregation, right? And it shows that from 1990 to 2013, the level of racial segregation in Dallas went up. So we're not actually doing any better. And on top of that, you also have a green arrow that shows that the level of segregation in the city of Dallas is actually more severe than the segregation in the region as a whole. Long story short, segregation is actually worsening, and we are more segregated in Dallas than we are in our overall region. But something that was super important for us when we're doing this assessment is that, you know, like we talk about stuff that often we're aware of, right? Like affordability pressure, segregation is a problem. But to be able to address it, we often have to map it, because those things just don't happen in the clouds, right? It happens somewhere. And since we are to be making a decision on where things go, then we have to be cognizant of what that segregation looks like on the map, right? So we map that guy. And you're like, what is this? First, that turkey shaped thing is the city of Dallas. That's what it looks like. You have three colors. You have red, yellow that you can't see, and you have green. The darker a color, the more severe whatever it's supposed to show. So this is the level of segregation. What we have done is to look at every neighborhood in the city of Dallas and see whether or not they were more non-black than the city average, right? Like, does the neighborhood composition the same as the city, or is it more white, or is it more non-white? If you are more white than the city, maybe whiter, that's how you say it, but I don't know, then it's red. If you are more non-white, then it's green. The darker the green, the darker the level of segregation. So what do you see? Anybody? Anybody but the professor. Right? So there are three things that came to me when I was doing this map. Is first, we have a clear divide, more white, more non-white. Right? It's spatial. I mean, you have like this V-cut, which is kind of crazy because you think about it, you can have the very same map, but that would go like green, red, like a checkerboard pattern, but it's not, right? On the other side, our neighborhoods don't look like our cities. If the neighborhood had the same racial composition as the city, it would show as yellow. How many yellow neighborhoods do you see? Very little, right? It's because our neighborhoods are either more white or more non-white, which really speaks to, again, the magnitude of segregation, but also the spatial manifestation of segregation. So far, so good? So the level of segregation is going up, and we have a clear knowledge of where those segregated neighborhoods are. Cool? Okay, so more turkeys. Racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. What is this? And again, you will see that the whole assessment of fair housing is to compare how the neighborhood compares to the overall city to see if it's fair or not, right? Like, are you the same as the tendency? Are you the same as the overall city, or are you different on that end or that end? Okay, so racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Those would be neighborhoods that have two characteristics. Either, well, they have a poverty rate of 40%. So what does it mean? It means that 40% of the people in that neighborhood are living under the poverty line, right? The second criteria is that you have a concentration of non-white of 50%, meaning that 50% of the folks living in that neighborhood are non-white. So if you have 40% of you folks under the poverty line and 50% of you folks that are non-white, you would be characterized as a racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Two things: racial segregation, poverty concentration. Make sense? Awesome. So what we've done is to look at, remember when I told you earlier, we look at people's information, we look at neighborhoods information, and sometimes we look over time to see whether or not progress is being made. So those recap area are designated in pink. So we have taken a picture in 1990, in 2000, 2010, all the way to 2016, and what we have found is pretty alarming. So first, we have found that, you see those pink area here in West Dallas and the southern sector are still there 26 years later, which is like about a generation later. So we keep talking about, like generational poverty, like it's something we don't know where it is. That's the face of it, right? We know that some of our neighborhoods have been plagued with intergenerational poverty and racial segregation for multiple generations. And this is how we can actually diagnose it or put our fingers on where those neighborhoods are. The other striking features that we have seen is that you have it's concentrated here and here, and then you have it everywhere, right? So then you have like dispersal of those pink neighborhoods, and you're like, oh shoot, when you have limited resources, you can't just spread thin resources everywhere because you're not going to make transformative impact. Sometimes you have to have dedicated heavy resources put into your neighborhood to really transform it. But we don't have infinite money. I mean, I don't. Do you? Oh, shoot. I thought I was going to get a check after this. So, a lot of neighborhoods, right? So it's become much more difficult to target them. And then on top of that, so they dispersed geographically and they doubled. So from 1990 to 2016, we went from 18 of those neighborhoods to 36, which was just when I briefed council, they're like, oh my God, this is awful. I'm like, I'm with you. It is pretty awful. Okay, something else. Remember this, so this is the recap map that we just talked about, and this one is the segregation map. Remember, if you are a red neighborhood, it means that your neighborhood is predominantly white, disproportionately white. If you are green, your neighborhood is predominantly non-white. Cool, you guys got me. So those dots are actually the location of like housing choice voucher recipients, right? So the folks that, for example, the Dallas Housing Authority gives a voucher to secure housing in an area of opportunity, there are the dots, right? So like we just map everybody's address against that map, and this is what it looks like. So far, so good? Awesome. So what we have found is that the families that are living under the poverty level, that we give a housing choice voucher to help them with housing, tend to live in those pink areas that we have mapped earlier. They live in the most impoverished and segregated areas, which is not the mission of affordable housing, okay? Similarly, what we have found is that those families are living in the most racially segregated neighborhoods. Again, not the mission of affordable housing, because remember what we've talked about earlier, the fair housing assessment. The purpose is to combat segregation, to make sure that we give opportunities for everyone to live in the neighborhoods of quality. Boop, 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 let's go over the numbers. Okay, HCV is voucher, right, Section 8. Guys, why do you think that those families are living in the most impoverished and segregated parts of our city and region? Fake news is not an option. I'm not playing anymore, obviously. Strike down. Why? I have a lot of time today. Yes, ma'am?
Their vouchers are denied.
Vouchers are denied? Okay. So, very good point. The way this program works, which is to me an absurdity, in Texas at least. So housing authorities, like the federal government has drafted this program, which is, hey, I'm going to give you a voucher, which is like a license to hunt, and you can take it anywhere as long as you don't go over the price, and then you can live in the private market, right, instead of living in public housing. Well, in Texas, landlords have the ability to say no, right? So like, I have a voucher, the apartment is $1,200, my voucher is worth $1,500. I'm like, cool, it's within my range. I go there and I'm like, hey, here's my voucher. They're like, we don't take vouchers. So that's what she's referring to, okay? So landlords refusing vouchers. Why are folks living in, do they want to live there? I mean, that could be a possibility. No? How do you know? You just don't think so? She's like, I'm not answering questions anymore. Why, guys? I'm sure you have some ideas as of why people are living in, yes, ma'am?
If the price of the voucher isn't enough to live somewhere else.
That's also something that has been, do you make them, you told them all the answers beforehand? Yeah. Is it a prank? Yeah, this is very good. So like I said, you have a maximum price point for each voucher that varies based on where you go. And those estimate of how much a voucher is worth is actually set up by the federal government. And sometimes there is discrepancy about what the federal government thinks a 2-bedroom costs and what it actually costs in real life, right? Any other questions? I mean, question answers, I'm asking the questions. Well, I'm just thinking, for example, I'm relocating right now. It's not a cost-free exercise to relocate, right? Because I mean, we give you a voucher, but we're not paying for your moving expenses, right? We're not gonna make time for you to go and visit apartments. Yes, ma'am?
Also, couldn't that have to do with your whole life there as well?
Yeah.
You're moving on the other side, you walk to work, you have to drive, across the city. It made a lot of different things change.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying like, well, I'm currently living in this neighborhood, but if I go somewhere else, I might incur additional cost of commuting, and my everyday life is being like all dismantled. Yeah, that's true. Okay, I'm done. Boop. Let's move on. All right. So source of income discrimination, which is what your colleague just talked about, is the ability of landlords to say no. Right? Which is like literally there's a state law that says it's okay for landlords to say no, and I believe there are only 2 states in the country that prohibit source of income protection. Like my source of income is the voucher and you don't want it, right? That's what we're talking about. So far so good? Awesomeness. So here's 3 maps. Let's forget about this guy. That map is our segregation map. Remember, like red is more white, green is more non-white than the average. The dots represent landlords that refuse vouchers. And you can see that landlords that refuse vouchers are predominantly in which areas? In the white area, right? Now, fast forward, this is where our families live. And you can see the mirror picture. Ta-da, oh my God, we're not finding vouchers where we are refusing them. So to me, right, and again, remember that, we talk about vouchers, those are our neighbors. Like when I was in school, I could have qualified for a voucher, right? So we're not talking about people that are from space, like we're talking about our neighbors, the folks, you probably guys are underage to drink beer, but the folks that bring you your food at the table, right? Those are everyday neighbors that we have to, assist in a way that makes sense. So if you tell me that, tell me what you think, I think it's absurd. We have a federal program that says, we're going to build the Housing Choice Voucher program to allow families to go to high opportunity areas, but we have a state law that says, well, only the landlord wants so. Kind of weird, right? It's kind of like you can do whatever you want if she says yes. That doesn't sound very fair, right? Okay, so this is like a map that it gets very crazy map-wise, but what I wanted to show, let's do how to read maps. Often you have the legend here, right? And then this is all the neighborhoods. Boop, boop, boop. So the green shaded areas are neighborhoods with low access to transportation and low access to grocery store. Yeah? The contoured pink neighborhoods are the recap that we've talked about. So it's racially segregated, economically segregated, and if you are green inside, it means that you also don't have access to transportation and to grocery store. It starts to be a lot, right? If your neighborhood is segregated, no grocery store, no transportation, your odds of doing well are shrinking. Yeah? Affordability pressure. Who rents an apartment here? Nobody? Oh, you guys are so young. All right, so when you go see your folks at the apartment complex, they usually want you to make 3 times the rent. Do you guys know why? No? Huh?
To make sure you're not behind on payment.
Okay, to make sure that you have the ability to pay. What is affordable? What is considered affordable? Do you guys know the rule of thumb? No? All right, it's cool. So affordability, which is it's measured as 30% of your income. Right? If you spend, I'm sure you have to take that down because it's going to be on your quiz. It will be on your quiz, I'm sure. So the rule of thumb of affordability is that you spend no more than 30% of your income towards housing and utilities. Cool? It's a rule of thumb. Don't ask me where it comes from because I know, but it's going to take us a while to get there. Right? Yes? Say what? What was the rule of thumb? So the rule of thumb is affordability is if you spend more than 30% of your income towards housing and utilities, then it's not affordable. So you have to spend less than 30%. Right? And if you spend more than 30% of your income towards housing, you would be considered as cost burden. It's an official designation, right? So for example, on the Housing Choice Voucher program, our families don't pay more than 30% of their adjusted income because of the rule of thumb of affordability. It's part of the program. It's not something that we have a say about. It's part of the statute. Cool? Making sense? All right. So this is a graph that is super cool that was put together by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And it shows multiple things, right? How much is minimum wage in Texas? $7.25, it's on there. So if you work full-time on the minimum wage, you can afford a rent of $377. Just doing 30% of that, right? If you find an apartment at $377, hook me up. Let me know, because that doesn't exist. So how did we get there? Because you think about it, minimum wage is a lot, right? On the other end, we know that affordability is 30% of your income, but there's a huge disconnect between what we pay people and what the housing market will demand. Can you guys relate to that? Is that making sense? Yes. It's kind of crazy, right? So there is obviously something to be talked about around how much do we pay people and how much housing costs, and maybe there is some intervention on those two ends and in the middle to start leveling all of this. if you are on a minimum wage, so if you are making $7.25 an hour and you want to afford a modest one-bedroom in the Dallas County, you would have to work 86 hours. I know, right? Raise your eyebrows. I'm raising mine too. Like, that's a lot of hours. And what does it mean when you have kids? Do they get to soccer practice? Right? So, I mean, what type of quality of life is it to work 86 hours? I mean, unless you're in grad school, don't do it. But that's the reality. So, because often, you know, when you talk about affordable housing and people having housing issues, there is a very dominant narrative around the non-deserving poor. People are lazy, they're not working, they put it upon themselves. Well, if you just look at how our policies are drafted, it is difficult for certain folks to be able to afford housing unless they sacrifice their time with their children and this whole quality of life and the time you spend with your family. Let's not talk about this, let's talk about this. It makes no sense to you probably, but it's a chart that shows what's being built over the years in Dallas across different price range, right? And what it shows, so for example, how many, you see like this dark purple one, which is like this one going up, those are apartments of at least $2,000. So we are building high-end apartment, and the thing that are, this is like less than $300, this type of construction is going down. So what we build is what's available to you, right? You can't go live somewhere where the unit doesn't exist. So if we build high-end apartments, but you don't have a high-end budget, where are you going to live, right? So what we are building our housing stock is directly influencing people's ability to pay and find housing, right? Is that making sense? So for example, when I briefed the city, I was like, hey, cool, we're not building what we need to build to help our folks because not everybody is making 6-7 figure salary, right? All right, moving on. Quiz. All right, case study. Pay attention, guys. Remember, the rule of thumb is this. 30% of your income, if you spend more than 30% of your income, you cause burden. All right, John is single. He has a monthly income of $20,000. He's single, guys. He makes $20,000 a month. I can't find John. He spends 31%. He spends 31% of his income towards housing, okay? John is doing well. Now you have Elizabeth. She has a child and has a monthly income of $600. And she spent 29% of her income towards housing. All right? Who is facing affordability issues? Is it John, Elizabeth, fake news, or is John companies hiring? John? Who says John? Raise your hand. Okay, who says Elizabeth? Who is willing to explain why Elizabeth is facing? Yes, sir? Can you speak a little louder, please?
She has an important child.
Okay. Anybody? You want to add more? The Elizabeth crew? Elizabeth gang, let's go. No? Yes?
She has to afford, the quality of life, being able to buy food and things like paying for education.
Okay, but the rule of thumb is 30%. Are you telling me that this means nothing?
But she also makes a lot less.
Okay, so I would concur. We have to think even through the data. There's one thing that I tell my COO a lot, because it's all about data, but truthfully, like data don't lie, but liars do data. And sometimes the way information is presented to you, it's gonna make you lean towards a conclusion that sometimes doesn't make sense. John is making $20K a month. You spend 30%, you have like a lot. You can buy like whatever you want. He's living the life. The guy is thriving. Elizabeth, she spent 29%, but then she has to like feed herself, clothe herself, take care of her kids, transportation, right? So my personal conclusion is that maybe this rule of thumb, which is again at heart of how housing dollars are spent, is maybe inadequate to reflect affordability pressure, right? The lower your income is, the less disposable income after housing you have to afford the rest. I mean, I wish we didn't have to eat, but we do have to eat. We have to go places. You have to buy books. You have to buy stuff for yourself, right? So I'm going to do it again. You don't have to change your mind. How many thinks that John is like struggling financially? That's what I'm saying. Who thinks that Elizabeth is struggling financially? A few. Who think it's fake news? Doesn't matter. Work harder. Ah, there's a fake news person over there. Oh no, she was just slow to put it down. I was gonna single you out. Take her. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through a research that I have done for my PhD. The motivation behind it, so it's very personal. Like, I love the field of housing and transportation and equity and all of that, and I really was interested about, like, why do we say the thing we say? Why do we draft the programs that we draft? And in America, it's kind of crazy, but poor people are vilified, demonized somehow, like, you're poor, it's your fault, it's your parents' fault, you should work harder, stop doing this, right? And so I was interested to see the extent to which those in affordable housing programs are exempt from affordability pressure. Oh, it's kind of backwards, like, hold on, if you're in affordable housing, you're like welfare queen, you're living on the government's back, you're living the life. Well, to what extent is it true? And so I wanted to first challenge the fact that folks that are in affordable housing programs are exempt from affordability pressure, but I also wanted to see, like, maybe we're not capturing affordability the right way, right? Maybe like this rule of thumb means nothing. So what I have done, it's super intuitive, right? Data analysis. So when I was at UTA, again, remember I had this big fair housing contract that allows me access to administrative data about, like, John making this much an hour, like bunch of information at the family level. So what I have done, it's arithmetic. It's pretty simple, guys. You can get a PhD quickly. I took everybody's income, right? And I took out the price of housing, because I had that in my data. I took out the price of healthcare, childcare, the price of food, like all those basic needs that you need to, like, live as a decent human being, right? I took all the stuff out of your budget but transportation, because I was interested to see, well, do people have the ability to commute? Because last time I checked, I have to get in my car to go to work, right? You can't just work from home all the time. It doesn't apply for everybody. So I'm gonna just give you a caveat. A lot of the data was part of the administrative record that Housing Authority keeps, but other data, I had to, like, model it myself. Like, oh, you have to find it where to find it online and do some type of equation. Not super crazy, but I've done that. So again, I take your income, and based on your family composition, I model, you would need to eat for this much, you need to, healthcare cost is gonna be this much, childcare, you don't have kids, so that doesn't apply to you, and so forth, right? But I did not take out the price of transportation. So whatever was left from my subtraction is your budget for transportation. What do you think I found? Again, my intent was to see, like, do people have enough money on affordable housing to travel, to meet their travel need? You think no? To what extent? Like, how many, like, percentage-wise? What's the percentage of folks unable to afford transportation on affordable housing, you would think? Is it like a huge need, or it's not that bad because they're receiving housing assistance? What do you think? Putting you on the spot.
35.
Huh? Just throw percentages. 35%? Like 60%? 20%? You guys have no basis. You're throwing numbers at me because I asked you to. Okay. All right, so those are the results. What I have done is to, once again, I took your income and I took out all those necessities for you to have a normal quality of life. Whatever budget was left, I translated it into two transportation value, right? Like private transportation, so revolving around car ownership, and the other one, your ability to travel via transit. Cool? All right, those are the results. So what I have found is that 75% of housing choice vouchers families are unable to buy, maintain, and operate a car. That's a lot, 75%. I mean, you guys are in the campus right now, but how many of you guys use public transit in your day-to-day life? Why? Because you can drive? I don't know. How old are you? What? I cannot hear you. All right. No? Do you use public transit? Do you drive? Sometimes? Oh, you guys are probably too young. All right, it's okay, I'll keep that question for myself. The second thing is, let's say they already have a car, so they don't have to buy it. Well, 63% of housing choice voucher families are unable to maintain and operate a car. Now, okay, let's say that car is not an option. How about public transit? Quiz, how much is a regional monthly transit pass in DFW? I say quiz, it might not be on the question, but how much do you think it is? A regional monthly transit pass? Huh? $100? $20? $40? $50? Okay, so it's $160. What? Pretty expensive. Yeah. It is. You guys are students, so you may get a discount. I think the discount is like of $60 or $45, I can't remember. But you know, again, when I did my equivalences, if you are a student, yes ma'am?
Can't you just pay for each ride as well?
You could do that, I don't think
If
it's,
you only order like once a day, if you didn't like use them that much, you could just pay.
you could do that too. But again, the assumption is that you would need to travel every day to go to work and so forth, and it's gonna make sense in all those things here. So, what we've done is to say, okay, let's pretend that if everybody in the family needs a transit pass, well, 57% of our families' housing choice vouchers are unable to actually afford a monthly regional transit pass. Let's say all the adults, but half of the dependents, which are most likely students or what, are traveling, then only 55% of them are able to afford transportation. Now let's say just the adults in the family are traveling. Again, still 54% of our families are unable to meet those transportation costs. And finally, let's say there's only one person in the family that uses transit monthly. Well, 52%. So, and by the way, my sample size, which is like how many families did I study, it was 22,000, right? So like, I mean, the trend is very strong. The confidence in the analysis, like the statistical confidence is very strong. So anyway, so the takeaway of that was that my primary intent was to challenge this like 30% rule of thumb, which is again at heart of everything of the housing market today, affordable housing programs, the way we use resources is maybe not adequate to look at what is your ability to pay. I would posit that the approach that I have taken, it's called a residual income approach. Like what is left after, as opposed to what percentage of your income, because if your income is $1 billion a year, I'm not talking to you. But if you're, I mean, I might be talking to you for other reason, but if your income is like $600 on Social Security or whatnot, then 30% is irrelevant. You don't even, let's say you don't, housing is free for you, you're still struggling financially to meet your basic needs, right? Key findings of the assessment of fair housing. What is the fair housing landscape? Well, what we have found is that we have a very stark geography of inequity, meaning that spatially, you know where the opportunities are, which is problematic. We have found that we have growing racial and ethnic inequities. So that means, you know, we've done an analysis looking at what is the neighborhood quality for African Americans, for white folks, for Hispanic folks, for folks at a lower tail of the income spectrum, people with families and with children and so forth, right? And we have found that by almost any measure, African American and Hispanic households tend to live in neighborhoods that are outperformed by the neighborhoods of white folks. Is that making sense? Like if you look at the average quality of life, the neighborhood opportunity level of a white family, it is much, much, much greater than those of African American and Hispanic and so forth, which is super problematic because again, we receive federal dollars and our mission is to make sure that we have integrated living patterns, that folks have a fair shot, and that everybody has access to opportunities. Like if you disagree with this type of normative commitment, you don't work for a housing authority, you don't work for the city, or you don't get money from the federal government, right? And so our mission, now that we know where things are happening and what is the severity of the gaps, is to develop strategies to combat those issues. And then something that was very important for me to highlight in that research is that not all of this is just the result of gravity of nature, right? We draft policies, we draft programs that are associated with those patterns. When you think about source of income discrimination, which is a state law that allows landlords to say no, this may have a bearing on where people are able to live and what type of neighborhood do they have access to. On the other hand, the way we look at data, we still have to be critical because numbers don't say everything. Like I told you, this 30% rule of thumb, it gives us an idea of something, but it's not perfect. So you often have to be not only critical of not having access to data, but also even when you have access. Like, is this really capturing what I'm trying to say? Like, is that making sense in real life? So those are the questions that we asked ourselves. And I believe this is it for me. And I would take questions if there's questions and stuff like that.
Can you tell us the work that you did with the transportation component that you just went over? Can you tell us, like, what was the end game from that? I know you got a reward, the Dwight Eisenhower.
So when I was in my PhD program on my third year, I got 2 years in a row, like a national fellowship, which is pretty much like, oh my God. I had like a national fellowship that funds your research, and so my research was gravitating around transportation, so I had the Dwight D. Eisenhower Fellowship, which is like a pretty big one, which again, unlocked funding for me, also just give me like status, because I don't have Instagram, so I have to get the worth somewhere. But consequently, like we really use that intel. Like for example, I was a consultant, and the people who contracted me out, which was again like 21 entities, one of them wanted to hire me, and some others, they had to fight. But I ended up working for the Dallas Housing Authority, and I can tell you today that every time we are looking to help our families, we are cognizant of the transportation barriers because of the intel that we unlocked. Those are things that maybe we have suspected in the past, but we didn't know the magnitude and like how pervasive transportation poverty was. And so, for example, like when we worked on this like Redbird Mall, remember, like we looked at people living close, whether they have the credentials to apply for the job. Then we also partnered with another entity to provide transportation vouchers and Lyft cards, right? And it's something that I wouldn't think of if I didn't do this research, right? So we really use that intel to provide like day-to-day solution for the family that we service. And one thing that is in the making that we're talking about with DHA is to have a transportation summit with transportation authorities to like share the knowledge for them to be aware, because I don't decide public transit routes. I don't decide the price of fare, right? But this is the type of intel we want to share with them if they see fit of maybe changing their policies or providing us with transportation funding or transportation vouchers so we can help our families not only through a housing subsidy, but also with transportation resources. So on the transportation side, that's the deal.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
What caused you to get into economics, especially in America?
Oh, why? So why did I move to America?
And what caused you to
Oh, because America, right? Ah. So long story short, it's not going to be short, so I'm going to sit down. Do we have time? Like I can tell them about my feelings and stuff?
I want them to do the trivia game at the end. So
Okay, long story short then.
Couple questions.
So I'm a basketball player, used to be. So I used to play in the French National Center, but I was also advanced in my studies. So when I was 18, I was starting my third year law school. But when you're 18 and you play like nationally, you have to go play professional. You leave that center and you go play professional. But I was already in law school, right? So I was like, I don't want to quit law school because school is life, yo. Like if you want to make a living, you kind of have to go to school. So my option really was to move to another country where you can actually combine sport and education, because it's not a model in Europe. So I moved to the United States. So again, I started with law school, so like the whole idea of like social justice and helping the peers is something that has been at core of everything that I do. So unfortunately, when I left law school, I had to like kind of retrograde to a bachelor's degree. But anyway, I got my bachelor's degree in like law and political science, and my master's in public administration, which is looking at how government functions, right, and how do you provide resources. And then finally, my PhD. The reason why I got a PhD, guys, because economics matters a lot. Like in my master's, I did not develop the technical skills to investigate and get this type of intel on my own, right? So I would have to rely on like already done research. But with my PhD, I've been able to look at, geographical data, statistical model, right, to really help me derive more intel. So that's why I got a PhD, and that's why I moved to America. Also for the French fries, because we don't have that many French fries. And the fried butter. What is this? Any other question about my life? Yes, ma'am.
Why Dallas?
Why? Because we all make mistakes, It's brutal. No, for real? Okay, who likes sports? That's it? All right, come on. All right, you guys want to laugh? So when I was in France, remember, like I'm in law school, I'm playing with this national center, and I have like a weekend to decide which school I want to go to. Because like you have like letter of intent you have to send to the NCAA or whatever. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have an agent. He's giving me a list of schools. He's like, hey, all the schools want you, check them out. Tell me which one you want to sign for. I was like, okay, I don't even speak English at the time, so I go on the internet, on the Google, and I type stuff, and I go on YouTube, and I put this school that wants me, and it says like Cardinals women basketball, right? I go on YouTube, and I see like craziness in the gym. I'm like, yeah, I want to sign for this school. This is awesome. My agent is like, are you sure you want to go for that school? I was like, yeah, sign me. Let's go. So I get in a plane like, oh, well, he probably doesn't do this, but I get in a plane, right? And I land, and next thing I know, I was in Texas. Long story short, I thought I was signing for like Louisville Cardinal basketball, but I signed for Lamar Cardinal basketball. That's my story. So I signed for the wrong school with the wrong name. I know, brutal. And then I tried to transfer the next years, but I tore my ACL 3 times. But yeah, so that's really how it happened. I looked at the wrong school on the internet, and I didn't know, because all the schools have different names. I don't know why you would call like Cardinals this one and Cardinals that one too. That's nonsense to me, American madness. So that's how I got to Texas.
One more question. Anybody? No, one more. This last one.
So what are some of the requirements you need to actually be able to be a part of the Dallas Housing Authority?
So to like receive housing assistance, in what way do you mean?
Or be doing something along the lines of what you're doing right now?
Oh, work.
To work with us?
Oh, okay.
Do you want to work with us?
Just curious.
Okay. I'm always up for interns. So
And I'll give you that information now.
yeah, so I'm not sure what you're understanding. So you want to know, can you rephrase it differently? I just want to make sure again.
Yeah, just to see like, do you look for, let's say I do want to join or
Oh, cool.
part of it, like are you looking for any specific degree or anything along those lines?
Yeah, so one thing that is like super important, I think for me, if I hire, but also for my CEO, is passion, right, and mission. And I think it applies for everything really. If you're not going to be good at something you don't like, all right? And then like helping people is, to me, intrinsically rewarding. Like I love it. I don't mind not sleeping sometimes because I have to do a lot of work. So like if you like the field of changing the game, like, because like changing affordable housing, it's grand scale changing. Like you're fighting the establishment. It's not easy, right? So if you have a passion for, helping people, and also if you have a passion like along the line of social work, then we have like a lot of caseworker position that comes open, right? So that would be you helping on a day-to-day, like families if they have questions with their paperwork and so forth. In our executive office, we have different type of skills that we're looking at. So in my department, it's mainly like research skills, kind of, right? So like your ability to deal with data, but also your ability to do like public speaking engagement, dealing with people. So if you have any type of technical skills in terms of software and statistics, that's highly valued. But we also look for just self-starter. Like in the million year, I would rather hire someone who doesn't have the technical skills, but has like a great attitude than someone who knows all the software that I may not even know and act like a fool, right? Because you can teach like statistics and like don't get all of this like impress you like, oh my God, I did 12 years of school, so like I have to be able to know that, right? But you don't have to get to that level of sophistication. Just like make sure that you're in the right field, that you like what you do, and ask questions and try to get better. And make sure that you have the right attitude too. Many times I had people in front of me that were highly skilled, but the spirit wasn't there, and so that wouldn't make the cut. So yeah, people who are self-starter, take initiative is highly praised in every enterprise, really.
Good?
Make sense?
Okay. All right. So everybody pull out your phone.
Uh-oh. That's something that would never happen in my time. Like, professor, like, pull up your phone. Like, what phone?
So since y'all did pretty good today, and I didn't have to like pick anybody out, I'm gonna give $40 as the reward.
You guys get $40? Oh my God, I want to see. want to take a picture of your class. Ah, you guys want to smile? Smile! Oh, beautiful people. Awesome.
At the end, when we finish, I'm gonna have you give the reward to whoever the winner is.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have you stand there and we'll do a group picture.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll be able to take it back with you.
Awesome, thanks.
Y'all need to hurry up. I left your hat at home.
Oh, what? I came for the hat.
So I brought, this is my
Oh, shoot.
one I personally wear, so I wouldn't give you that one. I know you said blue.
Yeah, because people are going to confuse me.
Yeah. So
It's okay, next
So I
time.
have it at home, but
Yeah, no problem.
what I'll do is when I come to the meeting on Monday,
Okay.
I'll leave one for you.
Thanks. Hey, Monday we're off. Holiday.
No, it's Wednesday. It's
Okay.
Wednesday. Yeah, it's Wednesday. All right, is that everybody? All right, is that everybody? Yeah? All right, let's get started. Okay, first question. Okay. Dr. Goofy is VP of Policy Development for what organization?
They're panicking. They don't even know.
Those of you that were on another planet, so we didn't say like 30 times Dallas Housing Authority. Okay, let's see who's in the lead. All right, Alexis. Okay, all right. Next question. Next question. After receiving her bachelor's, she got a master's degree in what from Lamar University?
Oh my God.
So not only did I say that at the beginning, which I told you to write something down, right? But she also reiterated it towards the end.
Ah.
For public administration. Okay, next question. She's a recent graduate of what in getting her doctorate? So where did she recently get a doctorate?
French flag.
Okay.
SMU? What?
If anything, you could have just looked at the picture. You could have said it on the diploma. All right. Alexis. I don't know where Alexis is, but
Who's Alexis?
she's kicking y'all's butt.
All right.
All right. Maybe something about the front row. Any clues? All right. Two more. All right. She's a recipient of the David Dwight Eisenhower Transportation Fellowship of what department? The U.S. Department of what?
They're all panicking. Agriculture? Agriculture, international trade.
Okay. So we just talked about that at the end, right? That shows you how much you pay attention to. So it's the Dwight David Eisenhower Transportation Fellowship, but you said it was for housing. All right, last question. Oh, Diego.
Oh.
Okay. Last question.
country of what? Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm tipping people. Great picture choice. Yes, I have Snapchat. Thank you for Diego, you're rich.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Can we have a picture? Diego, come back. No, that's loser. I don't know what we're doing.
1, 2, 3.
Awesome.
All right, everybody listen up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have Miriam stand about every district. We're gonna do a group picture so we can use for the Dallas Housing Authority and for Mountain View. So what I'm gonna do is ask everybody to come in the middle. Come in the middle.